Hello, welcome to the Wildline podcast. I'm your host, Dan. This is a podcast about movies and how much money they make at the box office. Today is going to be the typical weekend review for July 20th through the 22nd of 2018. We will walk through the top 10 of the box office, do some deep dives on the new wide releases that came out, Equalizer 2, Mamma Mia 2, and a shallow deep dive into Unfriended Dark Web. And then talk a little bit about some limited releases that are also out in theaters right now, and then walk through what's going to happen over the next few weeks at the box office. So let's go ahead and dive right into it here. So number one this weekend was Equalizer 2. Just, when we went into this weekend with the Thursday previews coming in and Friday numbers coming in, it looked like a Mamma Mia, here we go again, was going to go into the low 40s. That's what it looked like based on the Thursday previews and the Friday numbers. It just looked like it was really over-indexing from tracking. I was going to break through that $40 million mark. That did not happen. Essentially what happened is that Saturday, they kind of switched places. Equalizer 2 really had a strong Saturday, and Mamma Mia, here we go again, faded pretty significantly on Saturday. So they switched spots here. So number one this weekend was Equalizer 2 with $35.8 million is the current estimate. Wasn't even in 4,000 theaters, only in about 3,400 theaters. Per theater average was a pretty strong $10,500 per theater. So Equalizer 2, obviously Denzel Washington vehicle here. I believe it is. Deadline said it was his first sequel ever, which I really find hard to believe. But it's the second weekend in a row here that Sony has taken first. Last week, of course, was Hotel Transylvania 3, Summer Vacation. This is the third best domestic start ever for Denzel Washington. American Gangster did $43.5 million. Safe House did $40.1 million. I don't even remember Safe House. Can somebody explain to me what the hell that movie is? I don't remember that at all. And the big picture here is that while Mamma Mia definitely performed really well, it was still within the high range of its tracking. Equalizer 2 sort of leapfrogged its tracking and went way outside what it was supposed to do. They were looking at, mid-20s is what Sony was thinking for Equalizer, and it definitely way overperformed that. In terms of who showed up for Equalizer 2, well, even before we go into that, what is this? How does this compare to the Equalizer series? I don't really remember the first movie, to be honest with you. The first one came out in September 2014. I don't know what I was doing then. I just don't remember that movie coming out. It opened at 34, so this is a little bit over it. The sequel has increased in that just a bit, almost about $1.5 million bucks. The original grossed $101 million, which did not have a good multiplier, sub 3x multiplier on the first one. And I think this one's gonna really struggle, despite the fact that it has performed quite well its opening weekend. Next week is Mission Impossible, and the buzz on Mission Impossible is off the charts. It's, people are saying it's one of the best action movies of the last decade. So Equalizer is going to take a real punch right to the stomach, I think, in its second weekend. I don't expect it to have a 3x multiplier. I expect it to end up probably right where the original was, just over $100 million. But that, besides the point, it's still a big win for Sony. In terms of who showed up to see Equalizer 2, just looking at the information I pulled from the Deadline article, they get their information from Post Track, which does surveys of people leaving the theater. 58% male was the Equalizer 2 audience, 42% female. The biggest sort of quadrant here, and when I say quadrant, men and women over and under 25. That's your four quads. The biggest quad by far was men over 25, who are 40% of all moviegoers. Women under 25 came in second. Women over 25 came in second with 28%. So 68% of the audience was in that over 25 group. Leading demographics, Caucasians, white folks at 38%, African Americans at 31%, Latinos at 22%. So obviously Denzel Washington, one of the biggest African American stars in America and the world even, the African American audience really over-indexed what it normally would be for the average film. African American percentage of population in U.S. and Canada, it hovers around about 12 to 13%. If you include Canada, because it has a little bit less of a percentage of African Americans, so it's probably more like 12%. So the fact that 31% of this audience was African American does just kind of show you that, like, yeah, the African Americans really wanted to show up and see this movie. So that's the demographic breakdown. It's a really strong opening overall. What's interesting here too is that a movie like this does kind of seem like it's critic proof, because Equalizer 2 ended up getting, what did it get here? 51% on Rotten Tomatoes, which is not good. A 5.6 out of 10 as the actual average rating from those critics. That's pretty terrible. Audience score was 76%, but you know how I feel about audience score Rotten Tomatoes. It's totally hackable, so I can't really take into account that much. What's a little bit more accurate, I think, is Cinema Score. They gave it an A, which was actually better than the original, which was an A minus. This is like, you think about it, there, I threw all the what at you. Like, that's what happens. Like, here's the people who saw it, here are the ratings, all that kind of stuff. And it's always good to take a sort of a different perspective on it and say, like, what does this mean? Why is this important? What are the takeaways from this, from the broader business of film, movie business perspective? Denzel Washington is one of the few really bankable movie stars that still exist, and he's pretty old now. There was a firm about, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, and I forget their name, but they created a business where they would sort of survey film ideas for studios. And they essentially would give me a premise for a film, give me the director, give me who's involved, and they take that and sort of survey just random people to see how they respond to those concepts, those stars, those directors. And they see if I attach, let's say David Fincher to the new Spider-Man movie or something like that, does that make the audience more excited, less excited, or kind of neutral on it? It's a really cool concept. I think they're still around. It's a really important step in sort of, if you think about just like a movie as product development, it's something that the movie theater industry is so old school with. They don't really understand it yet, despite being around for 100 years and some. That like you can't like movies like R.I.P.D. Remember that Rip PD, what the fuck it was called? That was one of those movies that I think scored incredibly low on these surveys, even before the movie was made, and they just kept going forward with it. It was one of the biggest flops of all time. If there isn't an audience at that early, even pre-script stage for something, you do have to question, why would you go ahead and make it? And the whole point of bringing this up is that the person who ran this company, he was on, I think it was like the Ringer podcast, Andy Greenwald and whoever the other guy is. And he basically said that like there's only one person that automatically increases the interest and potential for a movie if they're attached, and that one person is Denzel Washington. And I thought that was really fascinating because, these sort of arguments have been made over and over again over the last probably decade that there are no more A-list movie stars that can get a ton of people into the movie theater. Now, $35.8 million isn't like, it's not a ton of money, but that's, I would guarantee you, 90% Denzel Washington getting those people out there to go. And so, and if you think about that, like how many people is that really in the United States and Canada, the domestic market? If you're like 35.8, the average ticket sale is, they say it's $9, but I think that's BS. I think it's actually a little bit higher than that. So I always use $10 as the average ticket cost. So you got 3.5 million people who went out to go see this movie, and most of those people went to go see it because of Denzel Washington. I mean, that's pull, right? And I don't know. I think it's interesting that he still is someone who can do that. While someone like Dwayne Johnson, who we all say is an A-list movie star, right? He feels like an A-list movie star. He's in all these big movies. He's in like 3 or 4 massive movies every year. Just in the last year, he's had, like Baywatch, Jumanji, and Rampage, and now Skyscraper. but even he couldn't get people to go out and see Skyscraper. I think that's the difference. I think if like Denzel was in a movie like that, where it's just centered on Denzel, I mean, Equalizer 2 is I guess the perfect example, right? I don't know anything about it, but I think people know it's Denzel. He's awesome. It's kind of an action movie. I'm going to go see this because of him. He's one of the last few people that can actually do that. And that's one of the reasons why I think Equalizer 2 did so well this weekend. Just in terms of like the budgetary stuff on this one, cost $60 million to make. If it does get into the $100 million range, it's not a big international film, I think, is the problem. So let's do a little bit of math here, right? Let's just say it hits 100 million. It's going to do about, that's surprisingly on the original, 55% was domestic, that's super, super high. So total then would be about what, 181-ish? Let's just say 185 to be nice. Total cost for a movie like that is going to be about especially for a movie that's in the mid-tier, it's about 3x that. So you're looking at $550 million to release. Wait. Sorry, I just completely screwed that up. I'm not talking about cost, I'm talking about revenue. So 185 worldwide, let's say. It'll probably take about 88% of that in actual revenue. So you're looking at $210 million in revenue. And that's on every single platform, and digital, streaming, TV rights, all that sort of stuff, in every region of the world. So you're looking at just over $210 million in actual revenue to the studio. Cost, we're at $60 million times about 3-ish. We're looking at $180 million total cost to release this thing. It's right on the break-even profit line. I would say they're going to find a way to make this profitable, because it's a smaller film, so they can like find ways to cut. And I'm sure the marketing wasn't massive, because your marketing is the fact that Denzel Washington is in it. You don't have to create that much buy-in for it. If a lot of people are just going to go because Denzel's in it. And I think that's sort of it's the perfect example of a mid-tier movie that's going to make, I think, a little bit of a profit. It's not going to be massive. It's not going to make $100 million in profit, but it'll probably make like 20, 30, maybe up to $50 million in profit. Which is kind of, it's one of those movies that I totally slept on. I was like, Equalizer 2, I don't remember the first one. Why is there a sequel? But here it is, number one in the middle of July, in the thick of the summer movie season. Okay, so that's Equalizer 2 at 35.8 million. Obviously, I've already mentioned it. Coming in number 2 this weekend was Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, coming in at 34.4 million. And this is a little bit disappointing, I think, just in terms of like the context of knowing what happened Thursday and Friday. The buzz was, and the tracking based on those numbers, was looking like an over $40 million opening, which would have been really fantastic for this movie. But it dropped off that Saturday night. And this is typical of female-focused and movies targeted at the female demographic. They tend to be front-loaded Thursday, Friday, and drop off on Saturday. I don't know why. I'm not going to go into why. But you saw it with movies like Pitch Perfect 2, 50 Shades Free, and even to some extent Ocean's 8. So this had a similar Saturday sort of drop-off. It was 24% over the original's $27 million opening, so that's really, really good. The thing to note about the Mamma Mia series, at least with the first film, is it had an over 5x multiplier. So Mamma Mia came out in, was it 10 years ago? It was. Mamma Mia came out in July, basically the same weekend back in 2008. Opened at 27, closed out at 144. One thing then we have to figure out here is inflation rates. Hopefully Box Office Mojo doesn't blow up on me when I try and do this. Oh, no, it didn't. With the inflation rates, and I don't know how much I trust Box Office Mojo, just to be honest with you, because they don't do actual inflation. They do it's like a very strange. They do all of their data based off on ticket price, the average ticket price, which I think is just not a smart thing to do. But we'll take it with a grain of salt. So there's basically saying that the original Mamma Mia opened up at 35, almost 36. So this is a little bit underneath that then, and then closed out at 186. Probably a massive international. $609 million unadjusted international for the original Mamma Mia. So this one opened a little bit higher than that, unadjusted, adjusted a little bit lower. So I would just say it's kind of very similar to the original. Not so we're not like splitting hairs here. But so it had that Saturday drop. It was supposed to do 40. It looked like it was going to do 40 and didn't do that. But I think the big story here is like there's no real drop off, and I think there is a potential here because we're in late January. And we'll go through a little bit here of what's coming out over the next few weeks. It is barren for, I don't even know what the next massive movie is going to be. There's not a ton coming out anytime soon. So this will play very well for a very long time. Deadline keeps bringing up The Greatest Showman. I think it's going to have a similar run to that. Audiences seem to like it. A- cinema score. Rotten Tomatoes, 79% Rotten Tomatoes. 6.2 out of 10. That's interesting. That's an interesting number because when you look at the 79%, I've talked about this last podcast, how Rotten Tomatoes can be very misleading. 79% is a pretty strong, fresh score. But if the average rating is 6.2 out of 10, that's closer to how Metacritic would do it. Metacritic probably gives it a 62 out of 10 or 62 out of 100. I'm sorry. So that's two very different portraits of the film. One is, hey, this is a pretty good movie. It's not a masterpiece. The other is, this isn't very good. And so it's hard to reconcile those two viewpoints from the same critics. It's just two different perspectives on how Rotten Tomatoes looks at it. So I think there's no major quality roadblocks here as to why this won't have at least 3x. I would say the baseline for this is going to be at least a 4x multiplier for Mamma Mia 2. I guess you call it Mamma Mia 2. It's officially Mamma Mia, here we go again, exclamation point. So 34.4 times 4, at least $140 million on this one. And I think it could go higher, like 150. So a really good performance. Didn't necessarily break out like a Pitch Perfect 2 did, but a very strong performance. It's going to have great legs. And maybe they'll do a third one for Mamma Mia. And I will say this too: one of my favorite film critics, Mark Kermode of the BBC and the Guardian, the Observer. He writes for a lot of different publications, but he has a BBC podcast on BBC 5, I want to say. He gushed about this movie, and if you have a chance, go onto YouTube and just look up Mark Kermode in his YouTube channel and see him review Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, and he practically cries in the interview. And this is somebody who is a very curmudgeonly, cynical person who like openly attacks Sex and the City 2 in like a polemic, which is also a great video to watch. He calls them the bourgeois, like capitalist pigs and stuff like that. He's like kind of a little bit of a Marxist going on there. So to hear him gush over Mamma Mia was very surprising, but it's a really fascinating review that he does. But it's certainly hitting a certain group of people in exactly the right way. It's super positive. It's warm. It's inviting. It's emotional. Obviously, it's a super strong movie for the female demographic. If you look at the numbers over the weekend. From Post-Track, women make up 83% of the audience for this movie. Specifically, women over the age of 25 was half of the audience. So it obviously is what you would call a chick flick, if that's a disparaging or whatever offensive term. It is what it is. Chick flicks do exist. They are a thing. If you want to say it more appropriately, a woman focused on the female demographic. And that's what this is. That's why it's going to play well. And I think it's really good counter programming in the summer here, especially with our political climate in the United States. It's just awful here. It's awful. There's no other way to put it. I've been following politics for the last 20 years pretty closely. It's the worst it has ever been by about 100. right now in the United States. Everything's cynical and angry, and people are fighting with each other, and it's violent. And a movie like Mamma Mia is the exact opposite of that. And I think that's one of the reasons it's gonna play so well this summer. Okay, so that's the top 2, with Equalizer 2 and Mamma Mia fighting out for number 1. Let's walk through the rest of the top 10 here. Hotel Transylvania 3 Summer Vacation dropped 47%, a little higher than I would want for that. 23.1 million per theater average, and its second weekend is $5,425. Total gross so far is $91 million for Hotel Transylvania 3. Ant-Man and the Wasp, which I caught the other day. It's all right. 16.1 million, a 44% drop, 45% drop almost. Starting to lose a little bit of theaters here. 430 theaters it lost. Per theater average, it's decent in its third weekend, $4,200, almost $4,300 per theater. Total take so far is $164 for Ant-Man and the Wasp. Let's take a little bit of deeper dive on that one. MCU didn't open that well. People were really concerned about it, like what's going on with this. I thought it was going to open $100 million. It opened at 76, I want to say. That's off the top of my head. I have to double check that. There's a lot of narratives going on with Ant-Man and the Wasp. And is this like a screw up by MCU? Is this Ant-Man not being that popular of a character? Or is it just kind of a good performance for one of the lower tier MCU characters? The way that I see it is this: Ant-Man was never going to be, I don't think, like a Black Panther situation. The character and the tone of the original film was comedic. It was light. And this coming after Avengers Infinity War, which was super serious and massive. You can't ask for a more clear juxtaposition within a single cinematic universe than Ant-Man versus Avengers Infinity War. So it's just a very different type of film. I think this performance is fine. It's going to easily make $100 million in profit, no problem. It does. One thing it does suggest is this. It suggests to me that there is a transition happening in MCU that everybody was aware that was going to happen. After Avengers Infinity War Part 1, obviously Part 2 is coming out next year, it's going to be a different entity, for better or for worse. It's just going to be different. The question is, how does Disney and Marvel figure out the next phase of this series? Because obviously you have to preload these films 3 to 4 years before they get released, right? So they've already been planning this out for a few years now. Ant-Man and the Wasp, to me, I know it's going to make $100 million profit. To me, seems like a film from a previous era of the comic book sort of wave that we've been going through. Now, I've done a lot of shows about this and talked about the different comic book movie waves that have happened since 2000. Ant-Man and the Wasp feels like it's sort of pre-Logan, almost pre-Deadpool, maybe even pre-Wonder Woman, in terms of its style. It does kind of feel like an early 2010s comic book movie. It does not have a feel of the more recent, I wouldn't even say dark, but more, I would say, adult themed stories. I always look back to Logan, and I was like, that was just a wonderful movie that I think had themes and writing that stretched the genre of the comic book movies. If I have one major criticism of the comic book movie genre in general, and I'm pointing this at DC, at X-Men, Fox, and especially at MCU, is that the writing, to me, caps out at a certain level. It's like it hits like that. It's really good, interesting stories, but doesn't probe much deeper than that. It's just like it's good, solid workman-like writing, but there's not a lot of high art to it, or what I would, it's like the literature, right, part of it. And you saw that in Logan, and you saw the potential. You didn't see it in Wonder Woman. No offense to that movie. It was a fun movie. I enjoyed it. The last 30 minutes was terrible, but beyond that, it was a good, fun movie. Popcorn movie. Logan showed what you could do with the comic book movie genre when you bring in great writers, artistic writers that are focused on the art of filmmaking and writing as a way to push people, right? And that's what high art's all about. You're pushing people, you're questioning their assumptions about everything, and that's what makes it great, is because it gives you the opportunity to think about the world and existence in a different way than you have before you went into that movie. Logan did that. Ant-Man, to me, doesn't do that at all, and is totally fine with that. It's totally fine with being light and fun. But I think one of the issues there for me is that it's almost like it's in a time capsule. Like, I feel like Ant-Man and the Wasp, it's going to make $100 million profit. Like I said over and over again, it's going to do quite well. It just doesn't seem like it's going to age well. The original Ant-Man, to me, did not age well at all. It just seems from a forgotten time already. And I don't know. I don't know where are they going to do a third Ant-Man? I don't think so. I feel like if Disney was smart and the MCU people were smart, they'd be like, okay, we got away with this one. Like, this is like the last time we can make one of these movies. And I say that only because I saw it, and it's not fantastic. I saw the original Ant-Man a couple of times. I thought it was okay. I think the biggest problem that they have more than anything, and a lot of MCU fans, and I'm not an MCU fanboy, obviously, at all, but a lot of the people online who I've talked to about this movie, the biggest thing that comes up over and over again is it's sort of why. It doesn't feel important. And I think that's the biggest issue here. It just doesn't feel like it's a vital film, and that's okay. But then how are you going to make a third one if the second one was kind of throwaway? And the first one was kind of throwaway too, to be honest with you. So I don't know. I don't know where MCU is going to go with this, or where Ant-Man's going to go with it. It's a fine performance. It's not going to flop. It's not going to lose any money. It's going to make a lot of money. But I think there's holistic things about it and where MCU is going that don't look great about this movie. It's the style. It's coming after Avengers Infinity War. What's the next phase of MCU? What creative path are they going to take to keep audiences engaged where the movies open over $100 million every single time they open one, right? And Ant-Man does not quell any of those questions, as I think the most critical I could be of it. It doesn't assuage any of those doubts that exist about where MCU is going. And if anything, it might bring up a couple more doubts. Like, are they really ready to move to the next phase of this? Why are they making a movie like Ant-Man and the Wasp, which feels like it came out 5 years ago? So I don't know. That's just as a critical perspective, I wanted to throw that out there. Performance-wise, people were pissing all over it. Like, it's going to do fine. It's going to break over $200 million. Domestically, it's going to make a lot. So there's no question there, but it's going to do pretty well. Okay, enough about Ant-Man and my MCU ramblings. Number 5, Incredibles 2. 11.5 million. Fantastic 29% drop. Lost about 500 theaters. Per theater average was $3,600 in its 6th weekend. It has now made $557 million. That's just domestically, folks. Let's look at international for Incredibles 2 really quick. It has made $940 million internationally. We'll easily cross over into the $1 billion mark for Incredibles 2. So obviously, amazing performance for that movie, and it keeps on getting better. Number 6 was Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom. God, this movie felt like it came out like 6 years ago. $11 million this weekend. A pretty good 32% drop. That's a really good drop now that I'm looking at it. Per theater average is still okay at $3,200. Total take so far for Jurassic World: Fallen Kingdom, 383, almost 384. Nowhere near the original. It's not going to come anywhere close. Internationally, though, Jurassic World, really strong, $813 million total so far. So it's already at $1.2 billion. So it's not like, I know I've been pretty negative about the performance of that film. I saw it. It's not great. I didn't like the first one at all. But Fallen Kingdom just kind of seems like it does kind of have that Lost World vibe to it. It's like, what are we doing? This is over the top and ridiculous. It's just not well written. As you can tell, I have my fucking degree in English because I keep talking about writing and good writing and bad writing. I think with Jurassic World, the overall story here is it needs a reboot for the third one. The second one is going to make a lot of money. It's not going to make anywhere near what the original made. And I think that's the problem. When you make a sequel, the intention is let's do what we did before and make just as much money. That didn't happen this time. It's not going to be anywhere close. And they probably spent just as much money to promote it and make it. So from Universal's perspective, it's kind of a little bit of a loss, even if they make $200 million in profit or $100 million in profit, because the expectation was going to make $500 million in profit. That's the one thing, when talking about profits and losses of films and the way corporations work in general, it's not just about actual performance. It's about performance to expectation. Because you tell shareholders, we're going to deliver this much money for every stock that you own, and then all of a sudden we're delivering 30 cents less, they're going to be pissed off. And they're not going to be happy. That's not a good performance. I think Jurassic World 2 is coming in pretty significantly lower than the expectation that Universal had when they greenlit the film. That's what I always I tried to emphasize on this show is that take a look at something like Justice League, right? So the expectation with Justice League was that when they thought about it and put it down on paper and wrote all the checks to make that movie, they're like, this is going to make over $200 million opening weekend, with the expectations easily going to pass $1 billion domestically, maybe $1.5 billion total internationally or more than that. And then when it, 3 or 4 years later, when it actually hits and can't even hit $100 million opening weekend domestically, that's such an unbelievable letdown and flop from that perspective. And I think if you looked at it just on paper, Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, you're going to say, hey, this did pretty good. It's going to do okay. It's going to make a profit. Universal's going to be happy, but they're not going to be happy because they wanted this to make $500 million in profit, and it's going to make maybe $150, $200 million in profit. So it's half of what they wanted it to do. So you just got to keep that in perspective when thinking about movies and how they work as a product within a big corporation. Okay, so that was number 6. Number 7 was Skyscraper, 56% drop. Terrible. This movie is just tail spinning right into the ground. The second weekend, per theater average is $2,900 per theater. Total take so far by its second weekend, $46 million. This thing should have opened at 40 to 50 easily, and it just wasn't a good movie. People didn't like it. The marketing was super muted, and everything was grayscale to the point where it's barf. I feel bad for Neve Campbell because she hasn't really been in a lot, and this is a big break for her to get back into a bigger movie, and it just, of course, it flops. Worldwide for Skyscraper is 131. Now, the Chinese market might help this out a lot. There's a huge Chinese focus to this movie. Its grand world premiere was in Beijing. Obviously takes place in Hong Kong, which is part of China. So maybe internationally they can clean up the mess a little bit, but overall it's a flop and it's going to be a loss for Universal. Number 8 was the first Purge this weekend, 4.9, basically $5 million, 46% drop here. Total take so far on its third weekend is $60 million. Man, I know in the last few weekends I was kind of down on this movie, but looking at that $60 million number, obviously it's not going to go up that much more, but it's going to hit 70, 75-ish? What did the other ones do? I can't remember off the top of my head. I thought this was going to be the last one. But it's already done. It's going to do more than the Purge, first one, which came out in 13. It's probably going to do more than Purge Anarchy. And hell, it might even beat Purge Election Year. So this might be the best Purge movie, which is sort of what happened. Why is this doing so well on these last few weekends? The drops are all sub 50%, I think, is probably what's happening here. And maybe it's going to die here in the next couple of weeks. Maybe I'm overestimating what it's going to do in its fourth and fifth weekend. But that's not a bad performance. I don't know. I thought it was going to be the last one because it was like a prequel and it opened at 17, which was really not great compared to the other movies. But the thing is, it's sticking around. And if it sticks around long enough and makes $70 million, Blumhouse and Universal can be like, let's do it again. Let's do another one. Speaking of Blumhouse, number 9 was Unfriended Dark Web. $3.5 million in the weekend. Per theater average was just about $2,200 here in its first weekend. This movie was made for less than $1 million. Blumhouse Tilt is an imprint of Blumhouse that focuses on sort of like micro demographics or micro budgets, one of the two, or maybe they're the same. Cinema score was C. Terrible, absolutely terrible cinema score. Horror films tend to be lower on general, but a C still is just a train wreck of a film. People hated this movie. 50-50 split male to female audience. 64% of the audience was under 25, so definitely a youth-centered film. But you gotta say, all that negative information, terrible cinema score, whatever. It was made for $1 million, and that's like these days is a micro budget for a feature film that's getting put out in the theaters. I think the technology has gotten to the point where film editing and all those sort of tools that you use to make a film have gotten a lot cheaper. But I just can't imagine making a movie like this for $1 million. It's insane. Obviously, because it's like it all takes place online, and like that's a big part of it. Still, though, I mean, it's a really impressive, and it's gonna make money. It will absolutely make money. It's already okay. Let's remove the marketing budget, which is probably what, I don't know, really low for a movie, but like $9-10 million, maybe 14, something in that range. They had to keep it low for a movie like this. It was a big South by Southwest debut, and Jason Blum was there to release it and all this bullshit. It's technically, if you just look at the production budget, which is maybe a mistake to do, but we're gonna do it. It's like it's already made, at least almost double that in actual revenue for the studio. So yeah, it's gonna make money. Number 10 was Sorry to Bother You. We've been watching this one a lot from Annapurna. A 2.8 million, a 33% drop. It didn't do a massive increase in theaters, just 245 more theaters this weekend. It's starting to cap out though, and I think I mentioned this last weekend. You can tell by its per theater average. In about 1,000 theaters, its per theater average is $2,700. So that's not good enough to really make that leap across, like I talked about last week, in the Grand Canyon between art film and wide release, mass release hit, like a Big Sick or maybe like a Lady Bird to a lesser extent. It's not going to cross that over because, like, at this point, it's only at 1,000 theaters, which for an art house film is an amazing accomplishment, I would say. But for a mass release film, that's not a ton. And if you're capping out at 2,700 per theater at 1,000 theaters, it's not going to go anywhere. It can't go anywhere, right? Because you increase the theaters by, let's say, 2,000 more, that per theater average, I guarantee you, is going to drop below 2,000, and then you're already at the Mendoza line. So it's just the difference between, like, it was super hyped, had fantastic opening weekends in New York and Los Angeles. I mean, like, really, really good. The moment it starts to expand, the story changes a bit, and now we're at the point where it's like, this is probably the best weekend it's going to have, it seems like. Unless it massively increases its theaters, which I don't think it's going to do, this might be its best weekend at 2.8 million. But, overall, a great performance for a Sundance sort of hit. From a newer company. Annapurna has been really hit and miss with how they release films like this. I think they did a good job on this one, and the fact that it broke $10 million, I think it is a win for that movie. Okay, so what else is going on? Sicario 2 is still sticking around here. Fourth weekend, 1.8 million in the 11th spot. Total take so far was $47 million. I'm so disappointed in the performance of that movie. Thought it could have been so much better. Okay, let's talk very, very briefly about some limited releases. Blind Spotting from Lionsgate, another Sundance movie, opened at 14 theaters. We're seeing a lot more like expanded limited releases. Usually a limited release is New York, Los Angeles, 4 theaters. But we saw Sorry to Bother You did 16. Blind Spotting doing 14 theaters. Pretty interesting stuff if you're a nerd. $23,000 per theater. That's if it was 4 theaters and it was 23,000, that would be not good at all. 23,000 at 14 theaters is a little bit better, but it's going nowhere. It's essentially the end story to that. It's not gonna sort of play outside the big metro areas at all. McQueen from Bleecker Street on 4 theaters did $24,000 per theater. Documentary about McQueen. It's not going anywhere. Like a fashion designer who killed himself 5-6 years ago, something like that. So Yeah, not going anywhere. Another one, Generation Wealth. I'm surprised by not doing very well. Magnolia documentary here. 4 theaters, $8,000 per theater on 4 theaters. What the hell happened? There's so much positive buzz for that documentary. I've only heard like ecstatic things about it, and this is in like New York Times, that whole world, the type of people who would go see this in New York or Los Angeles, and they just didn't show up. I look at movies like Blind Spotting, McQueen, and Generation Wealth, and I think to myself, what place do these movies have in movie theaters? Sorry to bother you, I think does. There is like an exuberance about that movie, a colorfulness, of a vivaciousness that I think plays well in the movie theater. McQueen, Generation Wealth, and Blind Spotting are more intellectual movies, I feel like, that are cerebral, that you don't need to see in a movie theater necessarily with a group of people. So I just don't see where these movies fit into the business anymore. I don't think that they do. I think there are streaming movies, and people think like streaming is this bad thing. It's not a bad thing. Streaming is the future of entertainment, especially home entertainment. And so the fact that it's not, debuting on it like a HBO would be perfect for one of these. But I will say this, we're in a weird no man's land. Now these films are, at least. There's a new Robin Williams documentary that came out like a week ago on HBO. And like they've been promoting it a lot. I watch a lot of TV, so I know about it. But like it just seems sort of like, wait, shouldn't this be a bigger deal? Like, it's a Robin Williams documentary. It seems like it's really good. Why is there not buzz about this? And then you sort of see the flip devil's advocate side to the argument I just made, is that like when you release something in a theater, it has a certain cachet to it and a certain sort of branding and marketing clout that you get from being in a movie theater. The movie theater still has that aura to it. And the fact that a movie goes straight to streaming, it doesn't get that. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why McQueen and Blind Spotting are getting released in theaters, is they want that marketing hype and clout that you get from a theatrical release. That's something like that Robin Williams movie didn't get. And now it's like, the other devil's advocate argument to this is that like, okay, let's say you want to do it on streaming. What streaming service are you going to put it on? Let's look at something like Blind Spotting, which is like an art house Sundance film. What are you going to put it on? Okay, put it on Netflix. No one's going to watch it. Right? And how much money are you going to make off of it if you put it on Netflix? Netflix has now become, sadly, they had a chance to avoid this 4 or 5 years ago and they just didn't do it. Instead of focusing on the UX of their platform and how they categorize and show their films and how you browse films on the website, they said, fuck it. We're just going to be like Blockbuster, essentially. We're going to have genres and whatever, but like you're going to have to figure out what you want, like by digging through the 1,000 titles. If Blind Spotting goes on there, it's going to get lost. It's no different than if you put a Sundance movie in the drama category of a Blockbuster in the suburb somewhere. One copy, right? Like it's going to get lost completely and no one's going to see it. And that's sort of, I think, the fear that a lot of independent filmmakers get, or any filmmaker has, when they release their film on streaming, especially a platform like Netflix, who does not showcase films like this. They just don't. They showcase their own original content and stuff like that, but like a Sundance movie like this, they don't give a shit about this movie. And so it's kind of sucks. I mean, for something like Blind Spotting, I would probably sell it to a company like Filmstruck or Fandor or Mubi, which are streaming services that are tailored for art house movies in that audience, right? So there's potential, but right now it does kind of feel like there's a no man's land. It's like you want to get the marketing clout and hype from a theatrical release, so that when you do transition over to streaming, people will know what the hell your movie is. At the same time, I can't imagine they're making any money off of these theatrical releases whatsoever. But that was some limited releases that are out there right now. Okay, let's close out the show here and just talk about what's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. Mission Impossible Fallout. I expect this one to do quite well now based on the reviews. Let's see if it's up on 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. That's with 64 ratings so far. Average rating is 8.5 out of 10. So this is going to be kind of a special, I think, movie for Tom Cruise in the Mission Impossible series. Whatever they did this round, apparently they did something really awesome. And I don't know where it's going to open. You know, with if it had like 70% Rotten Tomatoes and the buzz was the way it was kind of typical Mission Impossible film, I would say, 50 to 70 million, somewhere in that range, which is a strong opening. It's not bad at all. Now there's the potential for this to really, I think, break out. Because the buzz that I've heard two things come up. I've heard Mad Max Fury Road as like, that's how good this movie is. Which is, Mad Max Fury Road is considered one of the greatest action movies of the last 10 years. But more, it's going to be like last 20 years. And once it ages a little bit. And I also heard Dark Knight. It's sort of like, hey, like there's this long series of Batman movies and here's this masterpiece, Godfather level movie within it. That's what I've heard about this. I can't confirm any of that information in terms of how good it is, but that's the hype surrounding it. So my guess right now is 70 plus. I think it's going to over-index, potential for a really big breakout possible, but I think 70 to 80 is a really good bet right now for Mission Impossible, which will be an awesome opening for that. Teen Titans Go to the Movies. That's actually got really good reviews as well. It's sitting at 100% Rotten Tomatoes with 10 reviews. Oh, that seems like they're cherry picking. So I think that's going to do pretty well. Obviously, you still have The Incredibles out. That's doing awesome. So I don't know if Teen Titans is going to take away a lot of that, or if The Incredibles 2 sort of overflow audience here is going to take away from Teen Titans. I'm not really sure, but I think it's going to do okay. In terms of numbers, I have no idea what that's going to do. 25 million, 30 million? I have no clue. I'm not going to guess. Blind Spotting, what we just talked about, is going nationwide next week. What are they thinking? Hot Summer Nights from A24 is coming out limited. That's probably not going to do anything. Interesting movie, though. If you're just... A24, obviously, is one of my favorite companies and distributors of film right now. They're like the indie darlings. It is an interesting movie to see. I'll put it that way. It is a genre kind of noirish coming of age film, but it's worth seeing. Is it going to do any business? Absolutely not. And then we're into August, and they got Darkest Minds, we got Death of a Nation, Christopher Robin comes out, Spy Who Dumped Me. A lot's coming out. Not many of these are going to do all that well. I feel like Christopher Robin might kind of be a weird breakout hit. It is from Disney, so how much can a Disney film break out, compared to expectations? But the trailer was really good. I think it's a heartwarming story that will do pretty well in this August month. It could be like the perfect timing for that movie because there's just nothing else really coming out to speak of that looks fantastic. I'm not even sure what Darkest Minds is. I'm not sure what that is. It is from Fox, though. Sci-fi thriller, PG-13. It looks like it's getting dumped in August, to be honest with you. Then we're into August 10th. Dog Days. I don't know much about that one. The Meg, obviously, big shark movie. Is that during Shark Week, probably? That should do okay. That's also a big China play, I think, as well, or just an Asia play in general. Slender Man also comes out from Sony Screen Gems. Maybe that one breaks out a little bit. Looks so stupid. I say that as a horror movie fan. Black KK Klansman from Focus Features is also coming on the 10th, limited. That one might take off. I don't know. We'll see. Then the 17th, you have Alpha, Mal 22. Alpha's been on the shelf for at least 2 years, it feels like. It's not going to do anything. It's getting dumped. Crazy Rich Asians is coming out on the 15th. On the 24th, you have Axel, Happy Time Murders, Searching. Searching, to me, put something on, just remember this movie, Searching. It's coming out on the worst weekend of the year, which is August 24th. It's the worst because everybody's going back to school, and the parents have kids going back to school, college students are going back. Obviously grade school and high school kids are going back. So it's just a transition 2 weeks here. Like the first last week of August into the first week of September is a total shit show for everybody. So it's like Searching is coming out on that terrible weekend. But there is something about one of the best trailers that I have seen in a long time. John Cho is amazing. Is one of my favorite actors right now. If you haven't seen Columbus, which came out last year, wow, please watch Columbus. It is so good. He plays the lead in this. Check out the trailer. I feel like it's going to break out. I really do. Despite coming out on that terrible weekend, I think it's going to do pretty well. And then not much else coming out, and then we're into September. Is there anything in early September? When do we get the next massive opening outside of Mission Impossible? It's probably going to be The Nun's going to do well, I think, in early September, and maybe The Predator, but that kind of takes us to the fall. All right, so thanks for listening, guys. I will be back next weekend. I might do a show in the middle of the week. We'll see how I'm feeling. Anyways, thanks for listening, guys. This has been the Wild Lion Podcast.